Woman, an in-depth exploration of the world of women today with Sandra Elkin.
Good evening. Welcome to Woman. Our topic for tonight is the image of women in the media. We're going to take a look at how the media looks at us. My guests this evening are Chaney and Joyce Snyder. Both Jan and Joyce are in broadcasting, and they are both on the board of the New York chapter of the National Organization for Women. Welcome. Let's start off by showing our audience some of the ads that we're going to be talking about so that we can illustrate our discussion. Perhaps you can tell us what's really being sold here.
Well, woman is a subservient slave is actually being sold here. This ad reads, if you can't read the small print, we taught our data entry system to speak a new language, dumb blonde. And this hardly does anything to promote a positive image of women in the minds of male management.
Particularly blondes.
This is the national airline ad that New York now brought to national shame and fame. It says, I'm sure millions of people flew me last year. And the sexual implication is quite explicit here. This is an ad for Ivory soap, and it says, can you compete with your daughter's little girl looks? And we pick up several things here. There is the woman always trying to be perpetually young, and she's being competitive as well. This time she's competing with her own daughter. This is for club soda, and this little bit of wisdom says, a good club soda is like a good woman. It won't quit on you. I thought horses were traded that way. This is for feminine hygiene spray. Actually, we shouldn't call it this because it's in no way hygienic according to the Food and Drug Administration. It says, unfortunately, the trickiest deodorant problem a girl has isn't under her pretty little arms. And the only thing I want to say about this at this point is the quote Bill Blass, and he said, when he developed his hygiene spray, if there's a part of the body left to exploit, then let's find it and exploit it and sell it.
Maybe you should explain who Bill Blass is.
Well, he's a designer, and he also did a spray. I think he did one for men, actually, as well. This says, up off your knees, girls, and we do object to the word girls. It should be women. The no-wax floor is here, and you can see the woman is a slave in this ad. These are two toy ads, and on the left there is a fashion doll, and this is a toy ad supposedly for little girls and little girl toys. And on the right there are action toys for little boys who are taught to be builders and thinkers and doers through their toys. This is a Ma Grief ad, and it's a good example of how advertising is really ripping off the women's movement. It says something like, you're liberated, you're marching for equality, and you carry the biggest placard, but a man comes along and carries your placard. Thank Ma Grief for unliberating the liberated woman. And you can see how highly insulting this is to a serious equal rights movement, because just substitute another oppressed minority, the black people, there, and there could be an ad such as, you're black, you're free, you're deciding who you want to be. You wear my grief. Suddenly you're in the cotton fields again, picking and shuffling along. Thank my grief for unliberating the free black male. Now, can you imagine all the ruckus if this would be said about black men? So this is really one of the things we're objecting to, the rip-off of the women's movement.
Do you also object to sex in advertising?
Well, not sex per se, but we object to sexism, and this is inequality between the sexes. We object to the double standard that's being sold to us in advertising. We think that's very detrimental, don't you think?
I think that if you took any one of the ads before, and one way you can always tell what they're trying to do to you in advertising is a very simple technique called role reversal. Had there been a man and his young baby in the commercial, in the ad that was shown about competing with your child, you could have seen how ridiculous it was and what an unusual position it was putting the woman in. If it had been men's lips on the first commercial, it's one. If you feel uncomfortable with the commercial that you see, it's very interesting to role reverse, to make it a man instead of a woman. You know, that's the that's taking part in this advertisement?
Yeah, you know, the sexes are really treated differently in advertising, and the product pitch, what is actually being promised by the clever use of the product, is different with women and with men. For instance, in a skinny dip commercial, the woman was not accepted, and the scene was a wedding party. And she used the skinny dip, and she went back to the wedding party, and she was very much accepted, and she caught the bouquet. And there, as in many commercials, the promise of marriage and a very long-lasting romance is usually the product promise, whereas in a man's commercial, the promise is usually implicated by a scorching look or a toss of a woman's hips or some kind of promise of a score in the great game of commercial love.
How do you identify a bad ad?
I turn purple every minute that I see one, actually. But what I want women to aspire to and what advertising to create in images is the idea of women being strong, adult human beings. And if I see a commercial in which a woman is being rewarded for, to go back to the cliche thing, the way that she brushes her teeth or shines her floor, and a man is usually being rewarded for something he does that increases his pride and strength, I, of course, feel uncomfortable with it, and it's very easy to identify the fact that the people who make commercials, who are men, the people who ultimately decide, the advertiser, often women take part in writing these, not often, sometimes women write the commercials, but the people who choose the commercials to be advertised are men. And it very much benefits them to put women in the position of feeling very inadequate and feeling that a particular deodorant or a way that she does the floor are going to reward her, you know, in these heavenly rewards, when we know that that doesn't make us happy to have a very shiny floor, or it doesn't make us happy to be used as sexual objects either, ultimately.
Dissect a couple of ads for us, say the Geritol ad or the Olivetti ad. Or
Well, the Olivetti ad is very interesting. I think it says something about, I wish I had the copy on it, it's just beautifully horrible copy. My typewriter, where's it go? My typewriter has a brain.
Well, the woman in the ad is called the Olivetti girl, and she is always very young and very attractive. And this must be reality to admin, because I've gone into about 100 ad agencies, and I've yet to see a woman under 30 working there. I don't know what they do with all the older women who work, but they're certainly not at the ad agencies. And the product is sold as the typewriter with the brain, because, you know, the secretary doesn't have one. So that's why we protested Olivetti.
Well, I think part of the copy said, I was unhappy and da-da-da-da-da, and nobody looked at me.
I didn't look right.
I didn't look right. I wish I could. I had it memorized once. It was so beautiful.
I think it also says, once an Olivetti girl, always
Always
an Olivetti girl.
And it lets her off the hook. She doesn't have to have a brain, and probably didn't anyway, according to the article. So she doesn't have to think at all. And in fact, the article goes on, the ad goes on to say that once I got my Olivetti typewriter, I dress better, I look better. It literally
Men started
says,
to like me.
Men started to notice me, of hanging our whole value on of creating this value system that says that my value is going to come out of the fact of what typewriter I have, if I'm going to be loved or not loved, you know, the way I dress, the way I look, everything, and that is going to be very important. It has nothing to do with what kind of a job I'm doing, or what kind of a person I am, or how well I think. It's what kind of typewriter I have, and they've. Oh, that's bad.
You know, I think it would be almost worse if we had this new kind of revolution where advertising sold us something on the basis of we were a superwoman, we were such good workers, and we were so incredibly adequate, because what I'm fighting for is the right for women to be mediocre, because the men are so mediocre, you know. And you always have to be 3 times better than the men and then fight to survive, and that's no good either.
Well, you mean in terms of like the new Geritol? She had said the Geritol thing. We'll talk about the new kinds of Geritol commercials, how they've now expanded us, you know, and said that we're now both in the home and in the office.
Oh, the old one said, my wife is incredible. She took care of the baby. She went to PTA meetings. She washed the dishes. She washed the this and that. And then she still cooked a great meal. And women's movement really, really protested it, especially because of the tag. My wife, I think I'll keep her. at the end. So then, to appease the women's movement, they changed the ad and they had her doing all these household slave-type duties. And then she said, then the man said, and my wife still holds down a job. They thought that would make her superwoman. But we said, well, now the poor woman has two jobs instead of one, and that doesn't pacify us.
What about daytime televisions, the so-called women's programs on in the afternoon, the soaps and the quiz shows? How do you feel about those?
They all seem to revolve around love. And it's really funny how love is being sold to us. Sometimes I think that love is being sold to us because it's incredibly profitable to the men who bring us broadcasting and advertising. You know, to paraphrase an old ditty, first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes the mortgage, the bank loans, the $10,000 wedding, then, you know, comes the baby carriage, that sort of thing. But everyone is having babies on the soap operas. That's one thing I noticed. And what's incredible is they're all hospital people, and the doctors are all getting the nurses pregnant.
They've never heard
and
of
they
the pill,
never
right?
have heard of birth control, right? And this is very profitable for all the Pampers that are being sold. In fact, right after you're being sold the fact that you have to have a baby, you have to get pregnant and feel adequate in the soaps, you will hear a Pampers ad that goes something like, well, in one ad, there are lots of children around the crib. They talk about the product, and then it ends by one little boy, he's about 4 or 5, saying, gee, I'm going to ask my mummy for a baby brother too. And you kind of wonder what's being sold, the diapers or babies. So there's this constant feeling that you have to have children to be loved, to be accepted, and to feel adequate.
Well, I think daytime programming, as does all programming, as does all, it's very hard to make these generalities, but this is probably true, all commercials put the woman in the position of seeking male approval for their own identities. To go back to some of the ads that we saw at the beginning of this, the mother and the baby competing. They're obviously competing for, in this case, the father's approval. And it dramatizes. I think that the media, all it does is dramatize what the other institutions are saying also, which is a woman should be outer-directed and a man should be self-indulgent. And it's very easy to see this once you begin to be somewhat conscious of the kinds of roles that we're being put in. As Joyce said, we're not only being sold a product, we're being sold a role and a value system. And often this question comes up too, well, aren't men being sold roles also, you know, by the men who pick out these commercials? And they definitely are. Men are being sold a role of inadequacy too, so that we need all these kinds of things, that they create these needs in us to make us whole, organic people. But the difference between the way that men and women are advertised to is the fact that men are so often always put in authority roles. I think something like 90% of voiceovers are men. If you listen to a woman putting on eyeliner, it's a man who's showing her, and if you have to turn your hearing on in a different way, because you usually don't notice it, but you just think, who is telling her about this? And it's a man telling her how to put eyeliner on. One of the few things I've seen that men aren't telling us what to do are the new sanitary napkin commercials on television, which they have decided to have female voiceovers on that for some unusual reason. But detergent, soaps, anything around the house. And advertisers maintain that women will not listen to other women, they will only listen to men, and they keep self-perpetuating that by always making the man the authority and keeping the power and the indulgence in the hands of men.
What's your answer to that?
Obviously, for one thing, more female voiceovers. I would like to change the whole total system and change the whole value system, but I guess I have to talk about reform instead of revolution. And in reform, I would say that people should just deal with each other on commercials in more realistic terms, and that certainly there can be women voiceovers. Women do listen to women. And I think there have been some broadcast studies that have finally said that. For years they wouldn't have women on the radio because they maintained that women wouldn't listen to other women. And I think men love to think that because that, you know, keeps all this wonderful, arrogant power in their hands. But they're finding that isn't true, and that women are liking to listen to other women.
How do you account for the fact that most broadcasters will say, well, the soaps are on in the afternoon because that's what women want to see, when there's very little in news programming or any kind of serious programming going on?
I don't think they've ever made the effort to do intelligent daytime programming. And also it would be expensive, and the soaps are relatively inexpensive programming to maintain. And I think even though 85% of commercials are directed to women, and that there's obviously a larger percentage of women watching television, I can't remember the total percentage now, I think it's in the 80% or something, they tend to take the prime hours of relaxed television watching, and I don't know what, again, percentage of sports on television is. That they take up
Seems
whole
like
blocks.
100% on
Or
Sunday.
sports on the news. Sports and weather, okay. Sports probably takes up 10 or 15% of total news. And then, for instance, Billie Jean King was interviewed last night on one of the New York television stations, network stations, with a big male basketball star. That's all that I know about him. They did a dual interview with them, and they spent 4 minutes with the man, and they turned to her for one comment, and she made one comment, and that was the end of it. They make their, token little gestures to include women in sports. And so all the really prime good time is devoted to indulging male interests. And you know more about primetime programming than I do then.
Well,
what about something like Maude?
Well, there was a classic case about Maude just about last year where they had a show in which Maude chose a very realistic alternative to a problem. Problem was she was pregnant, alternative was she wanted an abortion. And CBS did have the courage to run the show. But what it amounted to was dollars and cents censorship, because all the advertising dollar, which is the financial support for the program, would not support the show. All the ads pulled out. So that is the way broadcast censors itself and never presents anything of a more meaningful, thought-provoking nature. They don't want anything that makes us think more than the commercials, more than Ring Around the Collar. But you asked us about the soap operas, why the soap operas were on. Mm-hmm. Well, I think they're on to keep women in their place, which is on their knees, scrubbing the floor and buying. Because I had a conversation with a broadcaster, and this broadcaster was in charge of daytime programming. And I asked the broadcaster, well, why isn't it more realistic? Because you say the women who watch the soaps are all economically lower class, and why is everyone so middle class in these soap operas? I don't see, the women that are home in broadcast demographics, they're all lower class, and everyone on television is so middle class. And the broadcaster said, well, these women need something to aspire to. And I just couldn't believe that. So what do you mean they need something to buy to? You have to make them feel very, very inadequate. So they need all the carpeting, they need all the chandeliers that they see on the soap operas. And that's the point, really. That is really just as much the commercial as the commercials is, the lifestyle. I remember when I was growing up, I used to see Father Knows Best, and I wanted a house with a staircase like Betty Anderson ran down, and I wanted a father like what's his name that was always
Robert
so wise.
Young, I think.
Yeah, and they do this. They paint this kind of rosy picture. So when you turn off the television, when you turn off the scape, which is what you really live through instead of really living yourself, you wonder, oh, what's the matter with me?
Whose fault is it? I mean, are you going to tell me there's a giant conspiracy? Or?
There is a conspiracy. And the conspiracy is one that the conspirators don't communicate with each other. William Lloyd Garrison, who was an early abolitionist in the late 1800s, used the concept of intelligent wickedness, that people really do understand somewhere in what they're doing, that they're doing something that serves their interests so much more than the people they're dealing with. And I love that concept of intelligent wickedness. I think it's very simple, that when an advertiser, he can sell a product by creating this inadequacy that you have to have this to survive. And when he's dealing with a woman in that ad and he keeps her in a role in the home, please keep me, I'll drink my Geritol if you'll please keep me. Then when he's being rewarded by that in many ways besides selling the product. When he gets home from and it goes home to, I'm sure, the advertisers I know, to, very fine homes. His wife is sitting there having been propagandized about what her role will be. And so he's again indulged by her because that's what his commercials tell women to do. And it sets in motion, it keeps perpetuating his control. He can feel very happy about the power he has over other people's lives, and continues to do so. As you know, both Joyce and I have worked a great deal with broadcasters and advertising agencies, and the resistance is often conscious. Advertisers and advertising agencies often know what they're doing, but have no intention of changing it. The result, I guess we'll talk about later, about what happens to women because of this kind of advertising. But I think I've seen some, I must say, I've talked to some advertising agency people who were somewhat unconscious about what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And some are beginning to look at their product more with a better social consciousness or a better human consciousness. And that's happening in some places, but you don't see the general effect of it on what we see on television or in any media.
Can you give us an example of some of the good ads or what's being done to change things?
I can give you a very quick one, which is I spent about several months dealing with an advertising, having talks with the account executive of Wall Street Journal in discussing the fact that Wall Street Journal advertising was directed all to the young man on his way up in business. He was pole vaulting over this, or he was walking through a forest, you know, contemplating his future. And I was very interested, and am very interested, in having young women know that the field of business is a field that is open to them too. And so we had some very good conversations, and at the end of several months of discussing this, the fellow at the advertising agency called me over to show me an ad that they had done as a direct result of our conversation. And it's a photograph of a woman reading the Wall Street Journal, and it says of the 4 million men who read the Wall Street Journal, 1 million are women. And then it goes into the whole reasons why it would be beneficial for a woman to read the Wall Street Journal. So
That's kind of an Adam's rib concept.
It is.
To me.
And even though it's a, you know, it's a bad conscience that a woman who reads the journal is a man, which is another, you know, saying that if you want to go into business, it has sort of a double whammy in there. But I must say that I think that their motive was fairly good, even though their end product had some things that one could quarrel with.
We have an example, a piece of film. Do you want to explain what this is?
Okay, this isn't an example of a good ad. This is the response of the National Organization for Women, and most particularly Midge Kovacs, but a lot of women helping her, including Joyce and I, and a very big volunteer effort. Though we're against volunteerism, we're in favor of it if you're trying to change your own life. This is a public service ad campaign, which I'll explain in a second.
Scored high in
If
our
you want to go ahead
test,
with it.
too. Well, there's no question. We certainly have a job for a college graduate like you. Of course, all our girls start in the typing pool.
Job discrimination based on sex is against the law. Let's use all the brains around. Woman power. It's much too good to waste. This healthy, normal baby has a handicap. She was born female. That means her job opportunities will be limited and her pay low. If she goes to college, she'll still earn less than many men with a 9th grade education. Job discrimination based on sex is against the law. Think about your own daughter. She's handicapped too. Woman power. It's much too good to waste.
You go.
We're very proud of these commercials, and there is free time on radio and we also have radio and print commercials along the same lines with other, you know, parts of sex discrimination covered. And every woman should call her radio and television stations if she hasn't seen these on the air, and they will. They know how to. The stations know how to acquire the commercials, and with your request and pressure, they will run them. And I think that they do a lot of good. We've had tremendous response on this from all over the country. We have so far about $2 million worth of time from the media.
Jan and Joyce, let's talk a little bit about the damage this kind of media coverage does to women. Not what we've just seen, but the kind of biased advertising that you discussed earlier.
The kind of damage it does, well, there's very specific and particular damage. One of the things that I was talking about before is the double standard. There is an ad that says, be good at being bad. And this to me is very offensive because I'd like to know if it's bad, why should we women be good at it? But and for every ill there is in society, there is an ad or a certain thing in the media that perpetuates it, in fact. So that's just one example of one of the things that makes us very angry.
And confused, I think, that it sets up barriers between communication between men and women, because we're all supposed to be these crazy kinds of things that none of us are, and it makes it very difficult for us to really connect with each other. But I'm most angry and most upset about what it does to women, which we kind of said before, is to leave us with a sense of not having any value, to reward us theoretically on television when we do, flip, cunning. They give us certain tools, which are pretty ridiculous tools to survive in this world with, and advertising doesn't encourage our strength and doesn't encourage us to be proud and full, again, adult human beings. That's why we don't like girl. We like to be called women because we consider ourselves adult human beings. And none of, very little, let's say, of advertising really encourages human growth, or at least women's growth.
In the 1 minute that we have left, give some practical advice as to what women, who belong to groups who have media study committees, or women individually can do. Who do they write to? Where do they complain?
Oh, for 1 minute, I would say contact the National Advertising Review Board in New York for national advertising campaigns, the National Association of Broadcasters for programming and commercials that you find insulting over the broadcast media. I would say also contact the National News Council for bias in national news coverage, the Federal Trade Commission for distortion and bias in advertising, Federal Communications Commission for broadcast.
What about the FCC and the National Association of Broadcasters? Are they being as effective as they could be?
Absolutely not, in less than a minute.
You can challenge licenses. Groups can challenge licenses, and they can write the National Organization for Women in Washington, D.C. to get a kit that shows that you don't think that the broadcasters are serving the public need. And it's more complicated than that, but in fact it can be. It has been done all over the country by black groups, by women's groups.
Air Chapter challenged the license of the ABC flagship station in New York. They're
York
operating
Mail?
without license from the FCC. We were so successful.
And it gets you in a position to negotiate with your broadcasters. You don't necessarily have to challenge their licenses.
Right.
They listen to you better this way.
We're out of time. Thank you very much. It's been most interesting. Good night, and see you next week.